So Ivan, or when you work together long enough, like they just know what you're going to ask. It's wonderful. We have such a fabulous team here. It's so nice to see everybody. And I just want to welcome everyone to our guest speaker series. We've got a slight shift this month. Instead of being the third Wednesday, we have gone with today, Happy Hour Friday, because we are so happy that Maggie is joining us and that she is our Secretary of State and is going to stay there forever until she decides to go on to bigger and better things. So everybody, this was a bring your own beverage. Please have it handy. And let's go ahead and kick this off. Maggie, you are our 36th Secretary of State.
26.
And you have done, sorry?
26. Don't age me, Claudia. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh boy, I got to change something there. Okay, he's our 26th Secretary of State, and you're just doing such a fabulous job. We love your transparency, all your energy, the things that you were working on. I was up at the special session. I was up at the short session this year up at the legislature and saw how active you are. And you're just everywhere working with legislators to try to improve access to voting, expand our voting rights, and so many other things. So it's really an honor to have you here this evening. And what I'd like to say, we can have anyone who has questions, please just put them in the chat, and Sandy will ask them once we get to that point. But a couple of things I would really like you to talk about. I mean, this is your venue, but I'd like to hear, we'd like to have a conversation about how we can make some structural changes in the legislature so that it was actually function a little bit better for the citizens and the activists like our group here that work so hard to get bills through. And it's like a month sprint or a 2-month sprint. The bell goes off, sorry, everyone cries, a few people are happy, and then we start all over again for 10 months of working like heck, trying to get stuff through. And then the other thing, I think I saw on Facebook that you were involved with Democracy, Unite Us Through Democracy, or Democracy Brings Unity. I'm kind of messing that up, but we'd love to hear a little bit about that as well tonight.
Sure.
How's that sound?
Sounds great, Claudia. Thank you so much. I'm going to start with a very minor complaint and then a massive thank you. My minor complaint is that nobody told me this was happy hour. So I only have water, but I'll live. My massive thank you is to all of you members of this caucus who have served our country with honor and dignity and fought overseas and dedicated your lives to ensuring the principles of our democracy. Whether I'm sure we all have a lot of mixed feelings about, our military engaging abroad and, whether you served in active duty, whether you have, always sort of been on the domestic side of the equation, what our military does, I'm trying to find the words tonight. I'm a little bit remiss in being able to articulate what I'm trying to say here, but I so appreciate the fact that each and every one of you has put your lives on the line for the sake of our country, but more importantly, for the sake of the principles of our country. What this country stands for, our democracy, the ideal of that democracy. And so I think of, any caucus that I've had the pleasure of speaking with, this one in particular, it means so much to me because at the end of the day, every single person that we see able to cast a ballot, right, and make their voice heard, we know it's because of the work of people like you and so many more that we are able to do that. And the truth is, and I'm not going to try to mince words here, we are in a very critical place in our history with regard to the health and continuance of our democracy in this country. We've had some pretty scary stuff happen over the last few years. So I'm definitely going to talk about what you wanted me to address, Claudia, with regard to the legislature, but let me talk about this conference that I went to the other day that I think fits in perfectly with what I'm already talking about here, which is the fact that we've had this amazing experiment, our American government, our democracy, for the last 246 years. We nearly lost it during the Civil War in the 1800s, but thanks to incredible leadership, we were able to hold our union together and to continue. And now we are in this place and time in our history where the facts of everything are being challenged, right? Whether it's COVID-19, whether it's critical race theory, right? Or what the right likes to call critical race theory, whether it's whether or not the current president of the United States, who was legally elected, and by the way, won not only the popular vote, but the Electoral College vote by a very hefty amount, won the election. And every day in my job, I am dealing with the issue of folks who are convinced, absolutely convinced, that the election was rigged and that Donald Trump actually won re-election in 2020, which we know not to be the case. And in fact, it's easily provable. However, we have a good proportion of people out there who are, it just completely goes against the grain of what they want to believe, that their preferred candidate did not win. And worst of all, you know, Donald Trump was the only person, or I should say the only losing presidential candidate in American history not to do what every other one has done, including Al Gore, who lost by one of the narrowest margins in history, to concede the election and to say, you know what, I'm really sad that I lost, but I lost, and to engage in the peaceful transfer of power. And as we see what's going on in Washington right now with the House committee that's investigating January 6th, we find out more and more every day about how not only did this former president not concede and engage in the peaceful transfer of power that we have come to believe in and expect of our elected leaders here in this country, but we are coming to know even more about how invested he was in not only not conceding, but in the activities of January 6th, which is frankly, it's deeply concerning. And so this conference that I attended in Dallas 2 days ago, you know, if you would have told me 5 or even 10 years ago that I would be going to a conference at the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, meeting with this huge group of Democrats and Republicans about how we all agree on this point, you could have knocked me over with a feather. However, there I was, and I'm sorry, my cat Goku is just really wanting to be part of the action tonight. There I was on Wednesday at the George W. Bush Presidential Center in Dallas, having this conversation. And I have to tell you, it was like therapy. It was so wonderful to be around so many people of both parties who, while we could probably disagree on just about any issue in particular, we all agreed on this: that Joe Biden won the election, that the 2020 election, like every election, was probably flawed in some very minimal ways, but was overall the most secure and accurate election in our nation's history. That our American democracy and this idea of what we are as a people is so dependent on the ability for us to be able to peacefully transfer power between leaders, even when we don't agree, even when we vehemently disagree with the folks who are elected. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that I was able to be in this room with so many, you know, really incredible, smart, thoughtful people, and people who I absolutely loathed, you know, for many, many years, but who all come together to say, the reality is that the big lie is the big lie. And how do we move past this? So how are we going to address this in the future? I don't want to say there was any magic bullet that came out of the conversation. What I will say is that a common thread through all the conversations, and I know Dylan on my campaign manager posted the link to some of the conversations in the chat. So I really will say, if you want to have your bucket filled too and feel like, oh my gosh, we're not crazy, we are not the only people, that there are actual real Republicans out there who are the old school Republicans, right? Who just, maybe they were against quote unquote tax and spend, but they'd accept the outcome of an election. They still exist. There are still many of them. What we need is for their voice to become the more dominant voice in this country. And right now we're in this period where it is the vocal minority that is, I think, driving the conversation around elections, at least on the Republican side. Unfortunately, today we saw a candidate for Governor, Rebecca Dow, come out in support of this absolutely insane 2000 Mules movie that maybe some of you have heard of, which really suggests that voting by mail is completely invalid. So I bring that up just to say that, anytime we come up with a way to help people vote more effectively, and so in 2020, it was helping people vote by mail in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and keeping people from having to go vote in person, they'll find a way to cast aspersions on folks participating in the election and to allege that it's fraud. And I think the big point that I want to make, and the big point that I made in Dallas the other day on this topic, is that it's possible to have access to the ballot box and security of our elections and integrity. It's possible to walk and chew gum at the same time. It's not only possible, we very much do that in a real and concrete way that is very effective. And so I really want to emphasize that with this group in particular. You all are the ones who dedicated your lives to service to this nation and to the principles of this nation, as I've already said, but I will say it again because it bears mentioning over and over. And I think, especially for veterans, especially for folks who have dedicated themselves either to military service or public service in any form, we should all be not just offended, but we should all take up arms in the sense of making sure we get every single person we know out to vote. I can't emphasize this enough. And we're having fires burning our entire state up practically right now. We have challenges just getting people to the ballot box anyway in an average day, in an average life here in New Mexico. We're struggling right now in our democracy in our state at this particular moment in time as I speak to you tonight. And so I just want to encourage this particular group. When I say take up arms, I mean, let's make sure that we're doing everything possible to get folks to the polls. And if you're not either, well, I assume everyone on this call is voting, so I hope I don't have to say that. If you're not making sure everybody in your community, and by your community, I mean your friends, your family, your work colleagues, whatever, if you're not making sure that they vote, please make sure, or at least that you've checked in, right, to get them out to vote in this primary, because in many cases, the primary election is the general election. Thank you. I see the I voted sticker. Yeah, Claudia, excellent. We need to not only make sure that everyone gets out and votes. I also want to put a call out, and we're getting a little late in the day for this primary, but for those of you who can to serve as poll officials, particularly in the general election, and I really make this challenge to our Republican colleagues as well, especially those who criticize how our elections are run, because I think it's so important for them to understand the actual complexity and all of the efforts that we put into making sure our elections are conducted fairly and securely. And my challenge to them is put your money where your mouth is. If you think our elections are not run fairly, then be part of the election process and help run it to make sure that the laws are being followed. I say that to this group as well. I know this is not a group that I have to challenge to public service, but for those of you who are willing and able, please consider that. Please consider letting your county clerk know that you can serve as a poll official in November. Consider letting the Democratic Party know that you can serve as a poll watcher if you can't serve as a poll official all day on election day. Having that independent set of eyes on the election process just to make sure that if any issues arise, we can know about it is important. With that, I'm going to get off my soapbox on
I want to,
voting.
before you switch channels,
Yes.
I know that we've got at least one poll official on the call today. Evelyn?
Thank you.
Evelyn, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
So Evelyn works a very cushy job out in Edgewood.
Oh,
Thank you,
stop.
Evelyn.
You're welcome.
And we may have other poll officials. Is there anyone else on board the call today that's a poll watcher or a poll official? Greg Seeley's got his hand up. Of course, Jerry Warner.
Good for you.
Torres, cool.
Yay.
So we've got 4 poll officials right here out of 25 people.
Excellent. Thank you all for that additional service. I don't want to beat a dead horse with this group because you all know, but the future of our democracy depends on this. If we want to continue to have a citizen-run democracy, we need to continue to have citizens who volunteer to run elections on the ground. And it's just so meaningful, and I'm so grateful to all of you. Whether you can or not serve as a poll worker. I know this caucus, no matter what, is going to help try to motivate the vote this November. And I know that we're, again, at this particularly challenging time in our nation's history and our state's history, we're, sort of in this transitional place after the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think what we know just from talking to friends and neighbors and with each other even, is that people are tired. It's been really difficult as a community to get through the last 2 years and all the challenges that we have faced. However, the challenge that we have right now is that this is not the time to sit back and take a break. We have about 5 months between now and Election Day in November. And everybody always says this is the most critical election day or the most critical election in American history. This is an incredibly critical election in our nation's history, because not only is our governor up for re-election, and I think if we all just look at the alternatives, it's a scary proposition. Every statewide office is on the ballot. I'm on the ballot for re-election, as you already said, Claudia, and by very definition, therefore, democracy is on the ballot here in New Mexico. Whether we're going to continue to move forward with expanding access to the ballot box and balancing integrity, and I don't say balancing to diminish, because integrity and accuracy of our elections is just as important as access. And when I say balance, I mean, we make sure both things are true. We have the potential of electing somebody who believes that the entire purpose of the Secretary of State's office is to elect Donald Trump, re-elect him as president, and to make it almost impossible for folks to vote, especially working folks. So that's very much true. And so our challenge in this election year is not to guilt people, not to shame them, not to tell them all of the horrible things that can possibly happen, even though those are all true. I mean, especially all of the women on this call, we all know the very real possibility, I shouldn't say possibility, the reality of Roe v. Wade being overturned this summer by the Supreme Court, and what that means. Whether we can still have babies or not, it means that we are second-class citizens. So elections have consequences, and they are real. But we not only have to talk to voters about what can, what's even worse down the road if we don't make sure we turn out in this election year. We have to be able to talk about the good things and what can come as a result of making sure folks go to the polls. We will continue to elect folks that reflect our values as a society. We will continue to pass policies like free college tuition for everybody, like making sure that we have access to healthcare. And of course, again, in my case, making sure that we are protecting that access to the ballot. So let's talk a little bit about, what more we can do here in New Mexico. And this is going to tie directly into the question Claudia asked about the legislature. I am obviously not a legislator, but I depend deeply upon the legislature to support me in the work that I do. And if I have an idea or if I have a program that I want to do in my office, I'm entirely dependent on the legislature to give me the tools and resources that I need, and sometimes to put into law the permission to do the things that I want to do to continue to expand access to the ballot box. So this year, as you all are probably more than well aware, we had three pieces of election legislation, none of which passed the legislature. And it's funny because for at least two of these pieces of legislation, there is no political reason why they shouldn't have. We have a majority of Democrats in the state Senate, and we have a majority of Democrats in the House of Representatives. And Senate Bill 6 and Senate Bill 144 were two pieces of legislation that should have flown through the legislature in the first couple of weeks and been signed into law by the governor. Those two pieces of legislation were a technical bill that would have helped me and the county clerks better do our jobs. That's Senate Bill 6, and Senate Bill 144 would have made sure that there are clear and specific criminal penalties for folks who threaten violence against election officials. These should have been no-brainers. However, they were all caught up together along with Senate Bill 8. Now, Senate Bill 8 was called the New Mexico Voting Rights Act. And to give a very brief overview of what was in that legislation, at least what was proposed by me, the governor, Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth. We had a couple of other Senate sponsors, Senator Carrie Hamblin, Senator Harold Pope, Senator Katie Duhigg, and we had support from the Speaker of the House and members of the House as well on this legislation. It would have made sure that every single person who's been convicted of a felony and is now out of jail could cast their ballot without having to jump through additional hurdles or pay additional fines and fees like a poll tax to make sure they could register to vote. Or I should say, get back that right to vote. It would have ensured that every person who wants to can sign up just one time and always receive a vote by mail ballot or an absentee ballot, because a lot of people just want to always vote from home, and they should have the option to sign up once and not have to think about it again. It would have made sure that every single person who goes to the motor vehicle division in order to get their driver's license or update their registration is automatically registered to vote, no questions asked, but also would give them the opportunity to say, no, thank you, I don't want to be registered to vote at the end of the day. There were a lot of other provisions. Some of them were a little bit controversial. One of them was allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in regular local elections, including school board elections. Now, we can have a conversation about whether that's right all day long, but at the end of the day, there was absolutely a way. In fact, the Senate Rules Committee decided after many hours of committee hearing to say, you know what, we're not gonna set 16-year-olds up to vote, but we're gonna allow 17-year-olds to vote in every election, because we already allow them to vote in primaries if they're gonna be 18 by the time of the general election. So this just makes sense. So to make a long story short, it had all of this support, not only the support of all of this leadership in the legislature and in the governor's office and by my office, but we had a very broad, very robust coalition of folks who were supporting it. And so the question that I get a lot right now, and again, this ties directly into Claudia's question, why did this bill not pass? And my answer unequivocally at the end of the day is because we had a 30-day legislative session this year. And I think that begs a bigger question, which is why in 2022, in a year where we were still and are still dealing with a major pandemic, where we have more money in our state coffers than we've ever had before, and we have really critical decisions to make about how we allocate those funds to try to lift our state out of poverty, to try to lift our state out of, being 50th in so many areas. By the way, not so in elections, but that's a whole other conversation. Why, when we have so many critical issues to address as a state, we continue to have this system that was set forth in 1912, when most of our state lawmakers had to make sure that they could have a very quick legislative session so they could get back to tending their ranches or their farms or their businesses. Because again, now in 2022, we still do not pay our legislators. In fact, we are the last state in the nation to pay our legislators for the work that they do. They receive a per diem to cover their costs, but that is not the same as earning an income for the work that they do. My argument is that we are in a 21st, we have a 21st century state. We have 21st century problems. We need a 21st century legislature. We need our legislature to meet more than 30 or 60 days every other year. And, the fact of the matter is, when we do have critical issues that need to be addressed, it's even like somehow a political struggle for a governor to decide whether or not to have a legislative session. Like, it's a big deal that, or did I say regular? I meant special legislative session. So we need our legislature to work longer every year in order to address these important issues, including issues like access to the ballot box. Because let me put it this way, had we even had, and Claudia, you were right there, we were seeing each other almost every day during the session. I think had we had even 2 or 3 more days, we could have come to some consensus and agreement, been able to pass all 3 of these bills, and we would be in a totally different situation right now. But the reality is, the legislature has to gavel out, at 12 o'clock on the 30th day of the session this year. So we didn't get the time to do it. So our legislature needs more time to vet issues. Another challenge is we had a lot of, and I'm not afraid to admit it, somewhat controversial proposals like 16-year-olds voting, proposals like back-end voter registration. Should a person, have to opt in on the front end or the back end of the registration process? Should election day be a holiday? There were a lot of questions about these proposals we had forward. And we did take a lot of time to have those vetted, but it probably deserved more time and more conversation. Had we should we have a longer legislative session? I think we could do a better job of that moving forward. So finally, it's hard to argue to do that without paying our legislators, compensating them not just for their expenses, but for their time, the time that they put into the work. Right. We know that we've had some, against all odds, amazing success at electing folks like teachers, folks who work for a living on a daily basis to the legislature, despite the challenges that poses for them financially and in their jobs. But first and foremost, imagine the legislature we could have in terms of, if money was not a question, if you didn't have to worry about making sure that you could pay your bills, who could get elected to the legislature, we could really open it up to have much more diverse representation. And we could compensate them so that they could take the time. They could take the time to really vet these important legislative questions. And it doesn't just apply to the election space, although I'm biased in that regard because I obviously, had a bill come very close, but not quite get over the finish line this last time. But the other thing that I've observed, and I've been, and many of you have done this for much longer than me, but I've been working and advocating with the legislature for over 26 years now. And often what ends up happening, because we don't have enough time, is we have legislation that's good enough, but not quite where it needs to be yet. And we have to end up coming back year after year to get another bite at the apple to fix things and to tweak things. Now, I'm not saying that wouldn't happen with a more professionalized legislature, but I think we'd have that problem a lot less, because I think we'd be able to take the time we need to get fully vetted, fully thought through consensus built legislation passed. I think that's the reality. We need to professionalize the legislature, as you said at the very beginning, Claudia. And I think if we do that, certainly in terms of the work that I do, and really needing the ability to get very necessary changes made, particularly those technical changes, when I need them to be made and when our county clerks need them to be made, I think this could go a long way towards that. The way we would do that is we'd have to amend the Constitution. So I think we all need to be talking to our legislators. I know there was a proposal this year in terms of legislator pay. I think that's a really important proposal as well. But let's urge our legislators to get a question on the ballot, to make our legislature more professionalized, to have them meet longer periods of time, to get them paid, to get them full professionalized full-time staff beyond the minimal amount that they have now, so that we can have, again, a 21st century legislature for the 21st century that in which we are living. And so with that, Claudia, I know there's a lot of questions. I've already talked a long time, so I'm happy to answer any of those questions now. And thank you so much for having me here tonight, all of you.
Absolutely. Sandy, what do we have in the chat, ma'am?
Sure, we've got a question from Bob Carroll, and he's asking, should we drop the 16, 17-year-old vote to get the Voting Rights Act passed? It is true that 17-year-olds serve in the military, but the 16-year-olds voting struck many people as a bridge too far.
You know, I will say there was a lot of, I definitely agree with that sentiment. I think there were a lot of people out there that really didn't like that piece. And my attitude is, any time we are able to expand access to the ballot box, even if it's incremental, we are making progress. There were a lot of people that felt very strongly about continuing the 16-year-old piece as well. But this is where I say, you know, if we can, and our intention for the record is to have more conversations about this in the interim legislative session period over the summer and in the fall, to try to develop some consensus around this, so that we do go into the next legislative session with consensus. And if that consensus is 17-year-olds, great. If that consensus is we need to take this piece out entirely because you know, the other pieces are ripe to be passed, and this is the one piece that we can't quite get over the finish line yet, I'm willing to do that. But I think we need to continue having the conversation, because I think it's really important to say, well, why don't you think 16-year-olds should be able to have a say in their school board members? You know, many 16-year-olds work, many 16-year-olds support their families. And I can hear echoes of a lot of the arguments going back, you know, several decades ago about why we shouldn't let 18-year-olds, you know, cast a ballot. And they're not exactly the same, but there are many similar arguments. So the long and short of it is, the core of that bill, I think, is very important, and we need to pass it. I am willing to make that sacrifice if that's what's necessary, but I think we need to continue having the conversation. So I hope that makes sense.
I agree. And it was interesting listening to the people up there who were against it. And the point that Bob's making is one that I was going to make if he hadn't made it. You know, 17s can join the military. And actually, Rick had an uncle, big strapping 6 foot too much farm boy, who lied and joined the military at 16.
World War II.
So he could
Yeah.
fight World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, and would we deny him the vote? It's just
Right.
crazy, frankly.
Right.
Yeah, but maybe the 17-year-olds are the place to start.
Yep.
And then we can see how that goes and study it and realize that the world didn't collapse. and we can move it down to 16-year-olds. I wonder if the Young Democrats caucus is doing anything with this issue. That would be kind of interesting to see if they're involved during the interim. And I don't know, Diana, if you're listening, I know you're very involved with the Young Democrats or anybody else here. Do you know if they're working on this issue during the interim session? Or the interim period between sessions? Or does anybody else know that?
I've told them they should look into it.
Yeah, I mean, they really should. This would be a good place for them to, get their voice out there.
I totally forgot, but I think, Dylan, did you have anything you wanted to add? He's actually, so for those of you who don't know, Dylan's my campaign manager. He and I met because I'm a crazy person and I am very slowly working on my PhD on the side while I am doing this job. It's, obviously I'm taking some time off this year, but I know Dylan in particular is working with some great professors at UNM on professionalization of the legislature. So I don't know, Dylan, did you have a comment on what we were talking about earlier? I'm sorry I didn't bring you into the conversation.
Oh, no, you're fine. I think you did great. Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is I'll offer up to share our manuscript. It's been, we got what's called an R&R, which is a review and resubmit. So that means that they're going to publish it in the journal. It's an academic journal. It's state and local governments review. They call it Slugger for short. I don't know. But so we're making edits on it and addressing the comments that some of the reviewers had, just to make sure that it's a little bit more comprehensive. But I'm happy to share that with you all. It's strictly academic, so it doesn't advocate one way or another. It just sort of talks about pros and cons and sort of what it does to legislative functionality as well as legislative output and things like that, and what it does to representation and policy, as well as resource and budget allocation. So it covers about 70 years worth of academic writing, so it's not opinionated whatsoever. It might be something that people in this call might be interested in. The other thing I was going to say is Jeff had a question up earlier that I wanted to get back to. If I don't want to hijack the meeting though, Claudia, if you want to. Okay, cool. I'll read Jeff's question. So Jeff asked a great question that I ask all the time. His question is, thanks Maggie Toulouse-Oliver for your tremendous goodness and leadership. What are your concerns and protections about certain citizens trying to discredit, compromise, and or seize voting machines? Thanks. And Jeff, by the way, is the county chair from Otero County. Is that right, Jeff? Is he still on the call?
Yes, he is. And as importantly, he is
Yeah.
one of our 2 CD2 vice chairs for the Veterans and Military Families Caucus, 32 years active duty.
Right. And Jeff's asking a question a little close to home down there in Otero County.
So here's what I'll say, and I'll put it in context. So many of you were active and engaged even back in 2004 when George W. Bush won his second term to office. And there were a lot of questions around at that time. What was becoming really popular were voting machines that were called DREs, or the direct recording device machines, where you would just you would vote on a touch screen and then it would go into a black box. And we didn't have any sort of a paper record or other independent record of how the vote was cast. And so folks, I think rightly brought up the issue that we don't have a way to independently verify the outcome of the election against those results. And even though I personally believe, based on what I know, that election, as much as it was a kick in the gut, was won fairly and squarely by George W. Bush, the questions it raised were really important. And so here in New Mexico, and frankly, we were in the vanguard as we went to all paper ballots and elections in 2006 as a result of this question and controversy. So as Democrats, when we raise these questions, rather than storming the Capitol and attempting to take over the Electoral College, engaging in treason and continuing to propagate a big lie, we said, okay, how are we going to make sure in the future we are going to ensure the accuracy of election outcomes. So we went to this paper ballot system. And then 2 years later here in New Mexico, we developed a post-election audit process. So not only do we have the gold standard, which is the paper ballot, the record to go back to look at, to be able to figure out what was the accurate election outcome. If we have a question about how our tabulators counted the votes, our computers, but we now have to double check those tabulators. And many states around the country, in fact, most states, in fact, the states that were the most questioned this election cycle all did a version of this, if not full recounts, just to make sure that they counted the results accurately. And so here's my experience as an election official for the last 15 years. As much as I would like to think human beings are infallible, we are not. Computers, when they are programmed correctly, are pretty much infallible. So this process of casting our vote, canvassing the results at multiple levels to make sure everything adds up and adds up right, certifying the results, and then conducting recounts if we need to in races that are incredibly close. By the way, in 15 years of recounts that I've conducted or overseen, we have literally never had an outcome overturned in an election using this system. And then we do also, on top of, in addition to post-election audits, spot checking to make sure that those tabulators counted correctly. And every single post-election audit that we've had in the state since 2008 has found that those tabulators have counted correctly. But the point of the audit is to make sure that's true and make sure that they don't count incorrectly, because if they do, if we do find discrepancies, if we find that the machines have been hacked or programmed wrongly, we can have a full recount of the results if need be. And what's frustrating to me is that when you have folks like Couy Griffin, and let's be honest about who we're talking about, Jeff, alleging that the election is rigged and conducting these extra legal audits like the one they conducted in Otero County, which still found no evidence that fraud existed or that the election was, found inaccurately, but then try to make the argument that we should take the machines away. This is the bottom line. The whole argument that the Republican Party is making right now, or I shouldn't say the Republican Party, the pro-Trump folks and the big lie believers and propagators. Part of the big lie is that it took a few days after the election to make sure that all the ballots were counted, and therefore there was fraud interjected into the election process to change the outcome, because Trump obviously won the election because on election night, when X percent of ballots were counted, he was in the lead. These are the same folks who want to say human beings should count ballots instead of machines, therefore taking us literally, and I am not exaggerating, months to count ballots, because that's how long it will take for human beings to do that and to do it accurately. Because it's not just about counting once and sending it in and assuming it's correct, right? Because how many of us have had to balance our checkbook 2 or 3 different times, even when we are well rested and have had enough coffee? Am I right? So, this is just part and parcel, folks who want to get rid of the voting machines, this is part and parcel of the big lie. We have to push back. We have the safeguards in place. We do all of the things necessary to make sure that those counts are accurate, and we will continue to do them.
That's such a good point. I'd really like to commend you on what you're saying here. And I completely agree. We need to make a distinction between the pro-Trump, reality denying, big lie team, cult, actually,
Yeah.
and the rest of Republicans. And, there are Republicans out there, as we all know, that don't support him.
I agree.
And if that party continues to go down that road, then we need to open the door to the big tent and give them sanctuary.
I love it.
Sandy, we have any more questions in the chat?
We do. We've got a few more. I'm going to skip one and come back to it because this one ties in with what you've been talking about, Maggie.
Okay.
And this is from Taurus Leba. And he says, hello, Madam Secretary. As a presiding judge and poll worker for 28 years, holy cow, good for you.
Ah,
Can you comment on your thoughts regarding protections for poll workers who are being targeted by certain groups who seek to disrupt the electoral process at the polling place itself? Thank you.
sure. So this is sort of it's a challenge that we've always dealt with, but I think in 2020 and now in 2022 and maybe in 2024, it's going to be something more at the top of all of our minds. So what we're doing is we're working with our poll officials. We're doing two things, and we're doing a lot more than two, but sort of two overall things. One thing that we're doing is making sure that our poll workers know and have the training and the resources they need to be empowered, to be able to deal with disruptions at a polling place should they happen, as well as to know what their rights and abilities are with regard to getting, if needed, law enforcement to intervene in a situation in a polling place. So if a polling place is being obstructed, or if there is a legitimate public safety issue, having them know and be aware that they are able to get that assistance if they need it. But the bigger picture of that is, well, how and when do we provide that assistance? So what we are doing is we are working very closely with our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners at all levels. So I'm talking DOJ, FBI, all the way down to county sheriff and city police. To be in very regular contact about what potential threats are and how to appropriately respond, and to make sure that, so for example, we have what's called a virtual situation room that we have up and running during the voting process, and particularly in the last few days of voting and on election day, where we have representatives from all of these partners that are keeping an eye out on what's going on out in polling locations, so to speak, so that we are able to very quickly and efficiently dispatch the appropriate response when necessary. So this is, it's a lot of work. It's not perfect. We're continuing to build on it. But I think as we continue to do this work, we're going to continue to get better at it and make sure that we are nipping, the idea ideally is that when we get wind of even a potential disruption, we're able to nip it in the bud before it ever even happens.
Okay. So then the next question is from Dorothy Seaton, and it says, where will the fire refugees be able to vote? By mail or in alternate safe locations?
I am so glad that someone asked that question, because I did want to mention it. So things that are important to know. State law says that if you're going to vote in person, you have to vote in person in your county. So in terms of people who are physically still located in their counties and who really want to vote in person, we're working closely with the county clerks there and our other partners to make sure that they have safe and secure polling locations to get to vote in person. As many of you are probably aware, we had actually relocated the Mora County Clerk's office to Wagon Mound for in-person voting. Now they're actually getting ready to move back into Mora proper starting on Monday, since the threat has passed there. And we're going to continue to let folks know if there are any changes to in-person voting in the county. Now, the bigger question is, if I'm not in my county, how do I vote? So to answer that question, it's going to have to be by mail. You cannot, unfortunately, go to, if I'm a San Miguel County voter and I'm staying in Albuquerque right now, I unfortunately cannot go to a Bernalillo County polling place and vote. What you can do is very quickly and easily apply for an absentee ballot at nmvote.org, or by calling the San Miguel or whatever county clerk from the county that you're from, ask for an absentee ballot application. But I would really advise at this point in time doing that online absentee ballot application. It's very quick and easy. Your ballot will get in the mail, and you just ask for the ballot to be sent to you wherever you are currently staying. So if you're at grandma's house, if you're at your friend's house, if you're in a hotel, because that's where you've been put up, you can get your ballot delivered to you at that hotel in the mail, and then you mail it back. Or if you want to drive it back up to your county clerk's office, you can do that too. But I think we're going to spend a lot of time next week making sure that folks know this information and know about how to get their ballots and how to mail them back. Lastly, if you're at an evacuation center, folks aren't getting mail there. Their mail is being held at their post office. We are working with and talking with UPS about getting special deliveries of ballots back and forth from the evacuation centers. So we'll have more to say about that next week.
Okay. The next question is from Evelyn, and she asks, voter turnout is unfortunately low in general. How does New Mexico stack up to other states in this statistic?
In general, we tend to ebb and flow with sort of, you know, what the country is doing. I will say that we are, you know, experiencing a particular challenge during this primary election, especially due to the fires and the displaced voters, which is why we're going to be putting such an emphasis on helping them to vote. But there are states that do a few more of the things that I would like to see us do here that have higher participation. You know, states that automatically mail a ballot out to every single voter, and Colorado is a very high participation state. And not only do they mail out a ballot to every voter, but they let you then choose how you want to vote that ballot. So you can send it back or put it in a ballot drop box or go to a polling place and vote that ballot, because a lot of people really like to just vote physically in person at a polling place. States like Minnesota also have very high participation. They're not necessarily doing universal vote by mail, but they're making sure every single eligible person is automatically registered to vote. They have same-day registration like we do here in New Mexico. I think one of our big challenges that we have to try to overcome is the rural-urban divide and the digital divide. So if we want to see higher participation, not only should we look at some of these other policies, but we should also make sure that every single person in the state has that equal access to the internet to be able to use those internet tools to vote, as well as to make sure that they don't have to drive 25, 50 miles to the nearest polling place, that they are able to drop a ballot in their local community if they get one in the mail.
I'd like to just chime in here for a minute. I mean, we're wearing these because we vote by mail.
Yep.
You know, 29 years in the military and 12 years overseas. I wasn't in Chicago, and there isn't much Navy presence there. The Coast Guard's doing a good job keeping the Great Lakes safe.
Yep.
But an awful lot of us got into that habit, and it's easy. You can sit at home, you can Google and find out about those judges that you don't know and some of the other people, and you can vote at your leisure. Mail it, drop it off, whatever. So I think it's really important. And the digital divide, I really like that idea. You said that the practice that you said they're doing in Colorado, where they just mail the ballots out. I mean, why not? Look at all the money candidates spend on mailers. How about the state spending that money to get those ballots out to people? I think it's a terrific idea. I would love to see higher participation. And we've got Josh Jones on board. He ran in a municipal race up in Rio Rancho. And I think, I mean, the turnout, I think it was
Abysmal.
like 12%.
Abysmal.
And then there was a runoff. Josh or Greg, correct me if I'm wrong or chime in, but I mean, it's awful.
Yeah.
Yes, so if I can jump in real quick. So
Please.
the general election was I want to say 11%, or it was either 11 or 13%, but I know for a fact that the runoff was only 9% participation, and you know, only lost by 147 votes. But still, you know, the district that Democrats that are registered or they're out, they didn't vote. So.
Well, and you know, to your point, Josh, and first of all, thank you for running. You know, thank you for serving. Thank you for running. I think you ran a great campaign. You know, Rio Rancho frustrates me because we have this regular local election now every November where we put where we gave municipalities the option to participate, where we have everything on the ballot to really entice voters, right? So that they don't have to think about going to the polls multiple times a year. And Rio Rancho is one of the holdouts. Unfortunately, we have well over 2/3 of the municipalities in the country, or in the state, I'm sorry, who are on the regular local election ballot, but we still have that third or so, including Rio Rancho, of municipalities that are just bound and determined to hold elections, at their own time. And what we've seen is that, it's not, anything to write home about, but we have at least 20% turnout in that regular local election, which is significantly greater than what you're talking about. And so that's one piece of the pie, right? One piece of the puzzle, like making sure folks don't get voter fatigue. But I do really think that the more we can make it easier for folks to vote, the more participation we're going to have. And it's not, I don't just think that. There is evidence for that all over the country in places that are doing more things to make it more accessible.
Agree. And I think, Sandy, I think Bob Carroll's got another question, or do you have more that you're seeing as well?
No, I see this one last question from Bob Carroll. And he asked, should we require that high schools register eligible kids to vote?
Require, what we could do is we could make high schools automatic voter registration agencies, just like we do with the motor vehicle division, and just like we are able to do with other state agencies. And what that would look like right now, what it looks like is that you're offered the option. So when, it could look like a kid coming in to register for school and get their schedule for the upcoming semester and be asked automatically, do you want to register or update a voter registration? And, if we were able to get back end voter registration, and I know there's we're talking about a lot of different technical terms, but basically where you're just automatically registered and then you have to say, no, thanks, I don't want to be registered. That would be a great option too. So I think that's a good question, Bob. I think we could certainly expand to the high schools. I know it looks like Greg has a.
Yeah, Greg has his hand up.
Greg's got his hand up. Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
No, I just want to say my 17-year-old, he's automatically, he gets his selective service card.
Yeah.
Without having to opt in, right? And he also gets recruiter mail and calls without having to opt in at his high school.
Yeah.
It'd be pretty cool if it was the same thing with his voting ballot,
Right.
registration and ballot.
All right. We'll look at that as a requirement. And then I love that particular point because you're exactly right. It's mandatory, right? You
Right.
turn
Yeah,
17.
and our state leads in so many of these things. The fact that we get to
Oh, we lost.
doing new cool things like this is because of Maggie's leadership, right? And because we have leaders like her in our state. So I just want to point that out. Like we're spoiled here for that kind of leadership, but it'd be pretty cool to lead the country in something like that, right?
I love that idea. And I owe you $50, Greg, for saying that.
There we go.
Not even. We'll just go grab a drink.
I'd like to ask Maggie, would you address a point that John Cole has brought up? And John, thanks so much for joining us. Could you talk a little bit about the same day registration?
Yeah.
There are some people in both parties who are a little concerned, that someone who is a declined estate is going to register into one of the two parties and then vote to disrupt the primary. So could you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it's important for folks to know that there's just not a lot of evidence out there to show that that's a really common or popular activity. And to the extent that it does happen, it doesn't, there's really not any evidence to show that it happens on a scale to actually affect the outcome of an election. However, what is important is that folks are able to have their voice heard and to participate. Right now, with the option to same day register and opt into a party. So, this is the other thing. The folks who are, including me, quite frankly, who are very big open primary proponents don't even consider this to be an open primary, because the thing about folks who are declined to state or who are registered with minor parties don't want to affiliate with a major party. And so the way the law works right now is that they are required to officially affiliate with a major party, even if it's briefly, right? They have to, you can go in during early voting or on election day, you can pick a major party to affiliate with, however briefly, get that ballot, cast the ballot, and leave, and then go back and maybe register back as an independent again, or what have you. So I think the likelihood under this scenario of folks doing it to deliberately disrupt primary election outcomes is extremely low. There is an argument to be made for just completely open primaries where you get to vote for any candidate of your choice, and all of the candidates are on the ballot. That's what states like Alaska are doing. That's what states like California are doing. My primary concern is with participation. As the Secretary of State, so here's what we do know. We know that voting begets voting. We know that if you vote in the primary, you are 10 times more likely to vote in the general election. If you have buy-in in that primary election ballot, and keep in mind to John and everybody who, kind of struggles with this question, as I used to, what really put me over the top on this issue was when I thought about the fact that there are parts of the state, I live in Santa Fe. I voted my absentee ballot today. And of the, let's say 20 races that were on my ballot, I think I voted on 3 or 4 that were contested. And of those, there are significant number that have no opponent in the general election. No Republican opponent. And the same is true in the southern part of the state, right? We have many races where you have a contested primary, but you don't have a Democrat running. And so for many people, or for many races, the general is the primary. That's where the race is being decided. And you may end up, if you're not affiliated with a major party, getting your general election ballot and the race has already been decided because there's only one candidate. So for me, this is why I think we need to allow for this. What we're doing in New Mexico right now, it is an option for many voters. I would like to think many voters, independent and minor party, will take advantage of it. But I think the likelihood of them using it to disrupt other primary elections and the ability for that to actually happen is pretty low.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
Alaska, I think, has a very high percentage of independents or declined to states, extremely high. And what I've read, and I'm not sure if it's all exactly right, but I think that that's probably the growing block of voters in America.
It is.
Are the people, okay, that are not affiliated with a major party. So,
Mhm.
we really do, like you're saying, need to move into the 21st century here and get more voter participation.
Yeah.
And Sandy, I think you have one more question, ma'am?
There is a question, but before I get to the question from Mike Melendez, Charles Powell is raising his hand, so let's
Yes.
let him go.
Charles.
Hey, Charles.
Hi there. Glad to be here. This is going really well.
Oh, good.
While in Minnesota back in, I think it was 1980, although I'm a Democrat, I temporarily registered as a Republican so I could vote for John Anderson. And yeah. But
So you're living proof of that. Is that what you're telling me?
Right. But I think a bigger reason to be opposed to open primaries is that a lot of the decline to state people are opposed to both parties. They despise both parties. But sometimes there is a Democrat candidate that wins them over.
Right.
And I can see them registering Democrat in order to vote in the primary. And if their candidate doesn't win, I don't see them remaining loyal to the party
Right,
because they despise it so much.
right.
But they might temporarily register so they can vote in the primary,
Mhm.
and then they're gone again.
Mhm.
So I do not support open primaries.
Fair enough. And for those of you who don't know, I've known and had the privilege of working with Charles for many years, and I deeply respect that opinion, Charles. The only thing that I will say is that you can do it now on the 28th day before election day. You know, people can do it now and nothing prevents that from happening. So, you know, I would like to think that if folks register and participate with the Democratic Party, and you're right, I mean, I think we saw this, you know, particularly like with the Bernie campaign in 2016, where we had a lot of folks kind of coming out saying, okay, I'm going to register as a Democrat or be part of the Democratic Party for the sake of this candidate. And then we saw a lot of people get very frustrated and disenchanted with the primary process and the party, et cetera. And I agree with you that that's deeply unfortunate. I would still, you know, as a pro participation Secretary of State, I would still argue every single day to give them the right to do that. And do I want them to come away disaffected and disenchanted and unhappy? No. I would work my butt off personally to keep them engaged, you know, with me and with the Democratic Party. And I think that's a responsibility that we all have if and when that happens. So thank you, Charles. And thank you, you know, just for being you and for all the amazing work you do for the Democratic Party and for the people you care about.
And I'd like to,
Absolutely.
I know we have more questions, but I'd just like to take a minute and acknowledge, you know, Charles, who's working with Veterans for Peace, and Pat Gaston, who is the chair of the Women Veterans of New Mexico, and Penn, who is the chair of American Veterans for Equal Opportunity, and Dorothy Seaton, who is, I might have the term right, either chair or president of the Santa Fe Veterans Advisory Board. We've got a number of leaders here on board the call who are all participating with our caucus, but it's really wonderful to see everybody here tonight. And Sandy, was there one more question?
There was one more, and I think that I missed it. Hopefully I'm not repeating myself. It's from Mike Melendez. And he says, professionalizing the legislature, which you talked about, has been voted on in the past, and it has failed. What are the reasons for this happening?
Well, part of professionalizing the legislature is paying the legislature. And it's really hard for legislators to vote to pay themselves. I mean, we're not even talking about raising pay. We're talking about paying them at all. And Dylan, I think you might have some insight in terms of the research that you've done that you want to share, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, I answer this question pretty frequently. I think from an economic perspective, you have to think about the composition of the current legislature. A lot of them are lawyers, some of them, you know, doctors, or not a lot as other states that have professionalized legislatures that come from more working class backgrounds. So it's, you know, the data is mildly, you know, adjacently supportive of this, but it's really hard to economically incentivize somebody who is accustomed to having a job 10 months out of the year and have a pretty steady income and then go work in the legislature to then take a decrease in pay.
That's right.
Potentially. And then, you know, now all of a sudden you've got a different career path. So really in my mind, and of course, I'm trying to separate my activist hat with my academic hat. You know, I think it's going to take a little bit of a lot of leaders that are willing to embrace that change. And there are some in there now. I think we need a little bit more. But I think that, you know, it's difficult to convince somebody to give up their current career who's got, a mildly, they might be in a good position to keep crafting public policy while also keeping their day job. It's going to take it's a generational issue, and it's the current composition of the legislature. So, take that for what you will, but that is a major roadblock and obstacle in professionalizing New Mexico's legislature.
I'd like to comment on that too, Dylan, and thanks. What I have seen is there are a lot of stakeholders up there in the roundhouse, and they have won, they're elected in the way the system is structured.
Right.
And they don't want to not win. They don't want more competition. And I think that's a big part of it. And I also wanted to mention, I put something in the chat here. We had it in our April newsletter. It was a very good article by Clifford Reese talking about the changes that need to happen in the legislative body to make it more professional. He's got 15 changes that he recommends, but he also goes back to a very in-depth study that was done in 2007 and 2008. And I put the link to that report. It's long, but it's in depth. And it talked about everything that needed to be done to make it professional. And what I've heard is 1 or 2 minor changes were done and they just threw the whole thing out. So it's another one of those things where when you don't want to pass it, you call for a study. And it's been what now, 15 years, so people have kind of forgotten about this. We don't need to study it again. We need to pull out the old study, review it, update it, make a couple changes. And I think it's going to be a huge information and education campaign. And the leaders need to do it. The caucus leaders need to do it. Parties need to do it. We need to get some activist groups in here. And literally, we need to talk about not just the pay, the cost that we're going to incur, but we really need to focus on the cost of the lost opportunity of not having a professional legislative body.
That meets for longer periods of time.
Amen.
Right. I mean, we don't think about that. And I remember the governor saying, we have $8.5 billion, dream big, send everything my way.
Yeah, we dreamed kind of meh, not big.
We dreamed that we could with 30 days with people not sleeping.
Now I
because
will say the opportunity scholarship, right? That's dreaming big. I'm so excited about that for New Mexico. We're really leading the nation. So there were some great ideas, but there's more big to dream that we
There
could.
is the National Infrastructure Bank for one.
Yeah.
That's extremely timely, but a professional legislative body, that's critical. Dylan, you got your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I, talking about coalition building, I was reading, every morning I wake up early and I read the news just to see what's happening. And I was reading the GOP candidate questionnaires on a number of different issues just because, I wanted to make my blood pressure rise. And, I'm not going to plug any of the candidates. I'm not about to do that, but I will commend one of their answers. And it came from somebody that I particularly don't like at all among them all. His Jay Block actually voiced some support for professionalizing the legislature. And that was because he said, I don't understand why we're not trying to get more middle-class folks involved in the legislative process. And so, I'm thinking to myself, he's pretty reflective of the primary electorate. I actually think that he's got a pretty good shot in this primary election, but that's a whole nother topic. So I do think that there is some possibility for coalition building among Republicans who might feel pretty confident that this is the right thing to do. Just something to think about. Who knows? Maybe after this election cycle, we'll start up an IE or something like that. Who knows?
So let's open it up one more time. I'll call for questions. Anyone have any alibis? John, you've asked a question to me personally. Would you like to voice it yourself, sir, to the group or to Maggie? John Cole? Maybe not. So there is.
I didn't think I did anything personal. It was to everybody. If something got personal, it wasn't my fault.
Okay, I'm not blaming you. I'll just read it because it did come to me. And it's a very good question. John's asking, why should candidates and legislators have to choose? Don't some states allow legislators to have outside careers like Hawaii? Good
Yeah,
question.
and in fact, that I think depending on how we structure it, right, they shouldn't necessarily have to choose. I think one of the benefits potentially of professionalizing the legislature is that we could reduce at least immediate conflicts of interest, right? I mean, the reality right now is that our legislators are literally taking votes that can potentially impact their actual pocketbooks at any given moment, right? Directly. That being said, so every legislature looks a little bit different depending on the amount of time that's called for, as a public servant, as a legislator. For some people, it may be a full-time job that they don't have the capacity to do anything else. For others, they may be able to have a side job. And I don't think, just to be clear, John, I certainly don't advocate, nor do I think anyone that's talking about this idea would advocate or is advocating for a pure 100%. You are paid, and your only payment that you can ever get is from the legislature. Even over the 15 years that I've been a county clerk and a secretary of state, I've worked on the side as a contract researcher. I've been an adjunct lecturer at UNM in the political science department. If I hadn't had the ability to make even a little bit of money on the side, I probably wouldn't have been able to meet ends meet. So I agree with you. I agree with you that we can absolutely, like I said about voting, access to ballot box and integrity, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but we can still make it a more professional legislature if we did actually pay folks to compensate them for their time and their work in the legislature.
So let's do it.
All right. Well, I wish I could just wave my magic wand, but as we're approaching next year's legislative session, Claudia, if you'll have me back, and any other relevant folks who are going to work on this issue in the session next year, let's do it and let's put a big coalition together. And I will be here for it 100%.
Good. That's awesome. I'm going to make a request with either Dylan or Maggie. Somebody put your donate to Maggie link in the chat, please. Are you taking donations, Madam Secretary?
Yes, by all means, please and thank you.
Awesome. Do we have any other last questions from anybody? Okay. Well, Maggie, we really, it looks like you got her in a neck hole there. Ease up there.
Hey, well,
I'm just
Okay.
little.
we just wanted to point out how excited we were to vote for you, Maggie. And also on this call, very excited to vote for Zach Quintero for state auditor. So just want to point out our buddy on the call today. Thank you so much for joining us, Maggie.
Wow,
Yeah.
love you guys. See you
It's
soon.
wonderful. All right. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks, everybody. And don't forget, go vote.
Thank you
Thanks
all
so
so
much.
much. Great to
Bye-bye.
see you.
Bye.